How can we explain an Italian film that provokes repulsion by showing such degrading scenes of human beings? This work shows us that, far from witnessing the massacre of some natives, a group of foreigners makes us reflect on the fact that it is not necessary to go to a tropical place to find this type of people. We find ourselves surrounded by individuals who behave primitively towards their fellow humans, abusing and taking advantage of people who never harmed them, all while calling themselves civilized. If this is your first time on the channel, subscribe now so you don't miss any important content about the darkest chapters of our history. Cannibal Holocaust, a work that transports us to the dense jungle between Brazil and Peru. A group of young filmmakers comes to disturb a tribe, destroying their village and taking advantage of them, making the mistake of abusing a woman from a cannibal village, which will cost them their lives as they are massacred in an inhumane way. This film has gained a reputation over time as the most controversial ever made, and no wonder, given its explicit content. The slaughter of animals is completely real, which earned the director a fine for allowing it. On the other hand, it is difficult to recommend this film, as you have to take into account the brutal violence, rape, dismemberment, mutilation, and murder of animals. However, it has its own achievements, such as good cinematography and truly impressive tropical landscapes. Without further ado, we will summarize this staging by entering the tropical jungle and learning more about the native tribes through these young enthusiasts. The film begins with a journalist who tells us that, a few hours from New York, there is a group of cannibalistic natives they call Green Hell, where a group of young people disappeared. Alan Gates, his girlfriend Faye and their friends. This happened when they went to document the existence of cannibal tribes deep in the jungle, showing us the last recording they had of them before setting sail in a small plane. During an interview, the journalist asks them if they are afraid, since other groups have previously disappeared in that area, but they feel too confident, stating that nothing will happen to them. They board the plane and head to the Green Hell, a place in the thick jungle between the border of Peru and Brazil. The university assigns the search for the young people to a renowned anthropologist, Professor Monroe, to find out what happened to them and if they are still alive. Later, we find a group of soldiers led by a lieutenant sneaking up on a group of cannibalistic natives who are eating. The soldiers shoot at them and manage to capture one of them, but one of the soldiers dies due to the poison of an arrow shot by a native. The professor arrives at the place and meets the lieutenant, who introduces him to the people who will accompany him on his expedition. A connoisseur of the place, Mr. Chaco, and a young man named Miguel, who can understand the natives. The professor approaches Mr. Chaco and asks him if they will find the expedition members alive. Chaco cannot assure him anything. He only mentions that there is a group called Yakumo that is very dangerous and that no one leaves alive after crossing paths with them. They continue advancing and crossing a river, finding clues that indicate that the young people passed through there. Later, Mr. Chaco stumbles and finds a corpse that he recognizes as that of Felipe, who was the guide of the group of young people and his friend. Afterwards, they rest for a moment and Miguel captures a possum to feed on, piercing it with a knife while it is alive. They continue advancing and find a native with his wife, whom he is punishing for adultery in a strange ritual, abusing her with a phallic object and then introducing a stone to beat her to death, releasing her on a raft towards the river. The men continue to advance and feel that they are very close to the Yakumo. Miguel separates and takes the native, stripping so that the Yakumo see that he has good intentions, allowing them to reach their village. Upon arrival, the natives show them what the group of young people did to their village, showing them one who was injured, indicating that they are at the risk of retaliation against the teacher and his group. But quickly, Mr. Chaco tells Miguel to give the boss a knife as a token of apology, which causes them to forgive them and invite them to dinner the next day. The journey continues and they head to find one of the most dangerous cannibal tribes, called Lamamo, who are the ones they are looking for. They have eternal enemies, the amateurs, who are also cannibals and dangerous. As they advance, they notice that a group of warriors are killing some Lamamo and try to drive them out of their trees with burning fires. The warriors are surprised by the Lamamo attack, and the professor and his group help the Lamamo scare away the attackers so that they see them as allies and take them to their village. However, the Lamamo distrust them, as do the Yakumo. So Mr. Chaco suggests to the group that they do something to earn his trust. The next day, the professor decides to do a psychological experiment. He strips naked and enters the river, while Mr. Chaco and Miguel watch from the shore. The native women approach the teacher, splashing and playing with him. Then they take him to a sanctuary where they find the skeletons of the young people arranged in a macabre way, confirming that they are all dead. At the same time, the professor finds the film camera with the rolls still intact and decides to show the chief of the tribe a recorder with the audio of the Yakumo and other tribes singing, getting the boss to agree to make a trade and invite them to a ritual where they eat a recently executed criminal. From here, the professor concludes his expedition, since he has in his hands the intact camera that confirms that all the young people were murdered. A day later, he is interviewed on television, where he tells of his experiences with the natives and talks about the fate of Gates' group, mentioning that he will show the recording found to clarify what caused their deaths. Afterwards, he meets with the channel's executives, who want to make a posthumous documentary about Gates' expedition. They go to an editing room to watch the film with him, showing the first footage he calls Last Road to Hell, which includes recorded executions by firing squad. One of the executives mentions that not everything that is seen is real, since these recordings have been manipulated to make them seem very controversial. The film continues to move forward, introducing Gates and his group of young enthusiasts, who are quite well known on television, which makes them a little arrogant, feeling like celebrities. They mention that they will head to a place called Green Hell with a guide named Felipe. The professor takes a break and visits the victims' relatives, who tell him little about the deaths of their relatives, and some despise him because he only caused them problems. Meanwhile, the professor remembers what really happened to Gates' team months ago and decides to watch the rest of the movie. The group of young people reaches the thick jungle and begins to cross the same paths that the professor and his group crossed months before. Afterwards, they catch a turtle and tear it to pieces, playing with it before eating it. During this, a snake attacks Felipe, and his leg is cut off to save him, but he goes into shock and dies. After the guide's death, the group focuses more on the jungle, finding a group of natives and beginning to attack one they just killed to follow his trail to their village. When they arrive, the natives are scared to see them. The group of young people begins to scare them by shooting into the air, believing themselves to be the Yakumo and attacking them, locking up the survivors while they set them on fire. This event causes excitement in Gates, who grabs his girlfriend Faye and begins to have sex with her in front of the natives, who watch him in dismay, since their entire village has been destroyed by them. Later, they find a place where old people go to die, and later, they encounter a group of natives tying up a pregnant and sick woman, making her give birth and burying her son, and then beating her until she loses her life. The professor meets with the executives again, asking them to keep the film under control and censor it, since there is a lot of violence. This creates a scandal, and the channel decides to suspend the release of the film, but the producers want to continue and obtain the product they promised viewers. Meanwhile, in the Yakumo Hell, the tribesmen begin to sacrifice one of the Yakumo. Gates and his group try to capture them to make a documentary. The professor watches Gates' recordings and begins to remember how people feel, while they begin to believe that they are heroes, leading them into their own trap. Finally, the group meets the leader of the Yakumo and his henchmen. From there, a fight ensues, but it is an unequal confrontation, and they become the prey of the cannibals. The film ends with the arrival of the authorities, who find the film and see the recordings of everything they experienced in the Green Hell. The reflection is clear. Culture can be destructive when faced with barbarism, and although the natives seem like the savages, let us not forget that they are the ones who were really on their lands. The professor is arrested, while the film Cannibal Holocaust becomes a testimony of the horrors that civilization can bring to places where life still has a different meaning, making many wonder if the true cannibalism is not in what the young people did when invading the natives' home. If you've come this far and learned something new from our stories, subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss our next videos. Together, we can discover and remember the truths that history often tries to hide.